I would like to welcome Mridula Koshy, who is the director of the Community Library Project, and is really like a strong advocate for what we term as the free library movement. And anytime you talk about something being a movement, you know that it's not just about the brass tacks and even the practical aspects of creating free libraries always have a foundation that is rooted in ideology or political thought of some kind. So we are going to actually format this in a way that all of the questions that have been asked of free libraries in very simple terms, generic terms, how do I start, how do I get funds? I'm going to pose those very, very basic and frequently asked questions to Mridula, and she will give us hopefully answers that will help us engage more deeply with the harder truths and the sometimes quite muddy realities of doing this work.
Saying that we're often asked in TCLP what we're doing or how we're doing it. And this is sometimes by practitioners, people who are running libraries and want to know how so that they can, take what works for them. And that engagement is part of who we are. We're not just running libraries and running them successfully and getting kids reading and getting kids adopting the tools or practices of the library so that they can have ownership of the library and turn around and invite more people in, which is a super effective way to run libraries, by the way. But we're also actually running our library as a way of learning how to run library, which is to say that we've often described this as a learning lab. We've talked about course correcting, which means we've made mistakes many times, and because we came into it informed by the idea that we would make mistakes, it was actually a lot easier than you might think for us to own up to it and switch tracks as needed. So when we looked at doing this webinar and we looked at talking about how to create libraries in a webinar setting, 1 second. I'm coming back. Hi, I'm back as myself. Hi, I'm back as myself. I'm not as Michael. Okay, there's noise out in the street, so I'm going back inside. Okay, so as we were looking at doing this webinar, one of the things that mattered to me, because, not to waste people's time to bring into this something that maybe isn't discussed as often, one of the things that matters to me to bring up here today is, when we do the work of creating these libraries and when we do it successfully and we talk about how that's done, it's just as important to talk about why we do this work. Because the place where why we do the work, which is, our politics, the analysis we have that govern the decision to do the work, and also how we do the work is governed by this. That way of looking at the world in which all of these people all over our country grew up without libraries, that is where the question of why comes up. Like, why do the libraries? We can start by first acknowledging that there are no libraries and look at why there are no libraries, and that helps us determine why we should be doing these libraries. And that then influences the practice, all the how stuff. How should we do the library? What should we be doing in the library? And that certainly helps with the course correcting we've had to do all along. So hopefully in today's talk, for those who have tuned in to figure out how they might adopt new practices in their library or inquire about the practices that we have that have worked and that have not worked, that if you tuned in just for that, I hope to cover a fair amount of that to talk about best practices in our libraries in TCLP. But throughout that talk, I do want to keep coming back to the politics that informs how we run our libraries. So that's the broad scope of what we're trying to do here today. Hopefully I get to weave in a few stories about things that have happened in the library, people we've met along the way. And one thing I want to say about the intersection of how we do libraries and why we do libraries is that it's not enough to have great politics, you know, to have this analysis that doesn't blame the people who are not reading for not reading. Um, that the analysis that allows us to say absolutely free libraries, there is no other choice out there, that is the only choice, that is what we've determined in our library, and we think that's about having good politics. But to have this analysis is not enough, because I will confess to, it's not a hard thing to confess to not knowing anything about how to do libraries 5 6 years ago. I think we've been doing this for almost 6 years now. There was a long period of about 4 or 5 years before that where a few of us were, you know, doing a small good thing once a week, reading to a small handful of kids. I would not count that period of time as anything much to do with library activism. It was more about sort of, you know, sort of personally wanting to make a small difference in a small number of people's lives. Library activism has taught me how to practice the politics, the why should we have libraries, why should they be free, why should they be open to all. So the answer to the question of how we run libraries or what should we do in libraries comes from actually the practice of doing the library. So if we're sitting here with like a little manual that tells us how to think about the world, or how to see like a, you know, a book I'm always asking all my fellow library activists to read is Seeing Like a Feminist. And, you know, seeing like a feminist means having a particular analytic framework. Some people would call it ideology. For me, ideology is not a bad word, it's a good word. It just means a way of analyzing the world in which we live. Feminism is another analytic tool. And library activism, informed by the politics of pushing back against the exclusion of people, an exclusion that has lasted thousands of years. That politics, the politics that informs TCLP's what's and hows of free library, I think these two I really hope that that lengthy introduction of mine was not overly cut off. And we could probably move to the first question you have.
Only 30 minutes today. But okay, so the first question is an often asked, one of the like top three questions, maybe it's the top one, which is I want to build a free library. I want to build it in a community that has never had a library before, but I don't think there are enough or any readers there at all. So is there any point in building a library there? And if yes, then where do I start? What should I do?
Okay, that's like such a huge question.
I
It
know,
has so
sorry.
many parts to it. So look at me, I'm rubbing my hands. Uh, so, you know, when I became a library movement activist, it had a very specific sort of trajectory to it. I'm not sure how much you guys will be able to take away from that, but maybe like, you know, look at it from the point of view of wherever you're situated. There was no library in this community in which I found myself. Separately from that was and by community, I mean a very small geographic, like 2 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer radius area around Panchil Vihar, which is in Sheikh Sarai, which is next to Chirag Delhi, which is next to Malviya Nagar and Khirki Gaon. And people who live in Delhi know this area. It's a small urban village. It's a little bit of a mixed income community. The majority of children in that community, as in the rest of Delhi, actually go to government schools and study in Hindi medium. And most of them spend an entire lifetime of not having access to books to read. And not having books to read is in itself not like this kind of static thing where in your first year you don't have access to books to read, and then in your second year the very same lack of access is same as the first year. No, it's not. It's like an accumulating loss for you, for your family, for the society in which you live, and for me. So my self-interest in this work is because that was a loss I felt. I was professionally working as a writer at the time. I was writing fiction. I think it's okay to call that a profession. And I did not have readers. And it was not entirely because, you know, the genre I write literary fiction is not appealing to as many people, because we were looking at, I'm in a country of 1.3 billion people. I'm being published by some of the major publishers in this country, and they are printing 4,500 copies of my book. 5,000 was like the threshold. Sometimes I hit it and sometimes I didn't. I published a total of 3 books. After 10 years of doing that, I stopped and I became a library activist, because I could not see how books and literature in India were a viable platform from which to enter the kind of questions I was interested in entering. And meanwhile, I was doing this small project of reading to a handful of children. They're in college now. They were in class 7 then. It's been like 10 plus years. And because some of them have themselves become library activists, my point is not, oh, I still know these bachas. No, I mean, like they know me. It's actually more, or it's mutual. They are library activists because we created an organization in their neighborhood. What used to be a small reading club became this larger thing. Around the time, I found a bunch of other people with whom to think about this question of, why create a library where people aren't reading? Well, because we want a literature, because literature is a great place of engagement, because societies that create literature, and you can't create literature without a library movement. In fact, if you look at the one example in India of where there was a successful library movement, it took somewhere from the 1840s and 50s to the 1970s. But if you map that in Kerala, you will see that the libraries came first and literacy came later, which really gets to the other question of, should we be giving books to children who don't read? Yes, because if we decide to only give books to people who read, then we essentially continue. There's a long history of having excluded these people. Sometimes people have been excluded in extreme punitive fashion, and the caste system is what I'm talking about here. So when you look at a community that's not reading, it could be this tiny little community near where I live. It could be that because my life history at that time intersected with all of Delhi, because that was the subject of the fiction writing I was doing. Or maybe you are an activist in some other arena and you're looking at the library question and you're concerned with the nation as a whole. Or maybe you work in caste and you're all about annihilating caste, and you and your comrades in your movement are looking at what role libraries could play in annihilating caste, and they could play a huge role. So whether you were, a fiction writer or some other kind of person engaging with society, sooner or later, if you're thinking politically about what's happening in this society, you're going to run into that neighborhood where people aren't reading and ask yourself, should I even do something about this? And if yes, how should I do something about it? Like I said, there's a whole lot of best practices we've figured out, and we've figured them out by actually doing it. But right side by side with the question of how to do it has always been the question of why do it. And for us, the answer, I'm speaking for a number of people in the Community Library Project, and for a whole lot of we have about 4,000 members now, for a whole lot of that membership that have grown up from class 7 and are now in college and are interning in libraries and planning to become librarians. At least close to a dozen people I can think of who are like now approaching their early 20s. For a whole lot of them, I think why create libraries is because libraries are a way of switching power from um, a history of people accreting power and disenfranchising other people to moving into that history as a participant and as an activist and saying, we want to see power shift from one side of this table to the other side of the table. The library movement is a viable way to engage with the question of power. So that's why we are doing library movement activism.
So for that person who does walk into that community and is, their consciousness is raised to the point where they say, okay, a library needs to start here. Now, it can be quite an overwhelming feeling to stand in the middle of that community and say, okay, I'm going to build a library over here. So can you just tell us, like, where does one start?
So there are different models for how to do this. There are people who have, and to some degree we did too, have a kind of a Vinoba Bhave model where you go to a community and maybe it consists of finding another NGO in a community. That's something we did, and asking them, can we have a little space? Can we work side by side with you? Can we bring our finances into your finances because you have a bookkeeper and we don't? So we've actually played out somewhere in this kind of continuum of other organizations who have also done similar things. There are library workers who have, for example, said, in this community, someone's going to have to donate a building or donate some land, or actually come in here and help us put bricks on top of bricks. And then only will we agree to. And they have like equations. They have, you do 85%, we do 15%. Or maybe it's the other way, we do 85 and you do 15. There are sort of analytic frameworks in operation there, and it's good to be aware of what those frameworks are. Doing the work as we've done it, we've looked at what were the assumptions with which we began this work. We began by thinking, we don't know how to do bookkeeping, or we began by thinking free is good. Like if someone gives us free space, then we don't have to charge children to come into the library. We actually have adult members too, and we don't charge the adult members either. We don't subscribe to the sliding scale fee structure, which other libraries have adopted, for example, as one way to look at the question of how to start a library. If everybody just gives a little bit, maybe we could all get together and chip in and start a library, and those who have more should give more, and those who have less should give less. That sounds good. Sounds like a socialized model. But because so much of the world that we're entering exists as it already is, with caste system, with class, because all of these things already exist, and just because you have a really nice idea that, and maybe even some good politics, doesn't mean you get to sort of remove yourself from that world. You don't move to Mars and start a library for children. You don't have a rocket ship service from planet Earth to planet Mars so that we can remove ourselves from caste and class. So what happens when you do a sliding scale fee structure? We never did it. We did that other, enter another organization and try to work with that, and that proved to have its weaknesses too. But in the sliding scale model, when we went around and visited libraries, one of my early visits was to a library in a major city in our country, and it's a celebrated library, and it's actually a beautiful library. And the entire time I was there, I kept hearing the practitioners in that space complaining that so much had been done for those folks who don't have anything, and yet they've been so unresponsive, and it's so hard to go find volunteers to come in and read to them, and then they don't show up. And somewhere in that conversation, we talked about many practices in that library. And at least for me, it seemed that the sliding scale practice they had in place, and they had cute names for it. You could be this kind of member, let's say for the purposes of this example, like you could be you could be an orange member, or you could be an apple member, or you could be a brinjal member. And your membership would give you 5 books at a time, or 2 books at a time, or 1 book at a time. And obviously the 1 book at a time person was the free person. And everybody knew, not necessarily who the brinjal was, everybody knew the system existed, and the brinjal knew that they were a brinjal. And that seemed to me to be a powerful disincentive to participate in the library, because you are coming into a library that's trying to be kind and make it possible for you to avail, free membership. But you are coming from planet Earth. And on planet Earth, you've already had this experience of being the brinjal. One of my colleagues in TCLP shared a story of year after year, the class teacher in the government school asking the children who, I can't remember the specific details of the story, but the children who are identifiable as those who need to be exempted from this 1 rupee 50 paisa or 25 rupee fee or whatever, and having to sort of be counted, and how that intersected with caste. Children already know. They know they are unequal members of their society. They learn it in school, they learn it in their neighborhood. A story we have in our library, one we experience year after year, is a really nice private school sends a class every year to our library to interact with our member leaders. Initially, their proposal was to come in and see the library and interact with members. We have lots of sort of policies around how people get to interact in our library with our library members. Our library is free and open to all, so people can walk in all the time. But it doesn't mean you can come up to someone and just talk to them. When people arrange with us to meet and talk to our members, it's either library activists and or library member leader activists who could be maybe as young as class 7 or 8 or 9, but many are older. That's who you're going to be talking to. So year after year, this private school sends this class to come and kind of do this kind of sociological inquiry. And it's a great opportunity for our member leaders who know a lot about how the world is constructed to turn the questions right back around and do their own sociological inquiry. So when they are asked, how many bathrooms do you have in your house? They ask the members of this private school, and how many bathrooms do you have in your house? And you cannot do that in a library where some people already know that the same thing that happened to them outside the library is now continuing inside the library. A, they might not even participate in the library, as was the case in that Bombay library. B, they might come into the library and participate, but never feel or even be invited to turn the question around and ask the other people, what is your experience? How do you live in a house with 4 bathrooms? How does that work? Why do you have that? What do you do with it? Should you have that? I mean, like, one question begets another question, right? If we want to empower people to enter that kind of critical thinking, if people are going to be able to find themselves empowered, they need that framework within which to do it. And I would say, in answer to the question of how do you start a library in that community you've walked into, you start it by doing it as a free library. I mean, that of course brings up all kinds of agonizing questions, like how much of my savings do I dip into? How do I talk to my friends and family about contributing? Where in the city or the village or the town do I find stakeholders? But I think one of the powerful arguments for the community library network, the network of all of us in this conversation right now who are running free libraries, one of that is that we want to identify, not individually, but collectively, stakeholders in this question. And if we can engage these stakeholders, that includes the government, that includes the private sector as a whole, but very specifically, it includes book publishers. We could be engaging them to look at this question of how can I run a free library in my community? How can I run it so that it's not just about CSR funds? Because you know what, we've run our library in part through individual donations, in part through our personal savings in the early days, not so much anymore, or not at all. In part by engaging with stakeholders and telling them they need to come to the table and they need to stake something, because the gains we're making are the gains that they're going to be enjoying. More readers is good for publishers. More libraries is excellent for publishers. Free books for members are still books that have to be purchased by the library from the publisher. And the publisher should absolutely think about at what price they're going to sell those books, because every book held by that child is a movement toward a future where the child is an adult, is a parent, and is buying books. Because there are hardly, I mean, there are children in our library, those who have been there for 5 years or 6 years or 4 years or 3 years now. Today, I listened to an amazing read aloud by our member, an old member of our member leadership council, who then left because, he was really cool when he was rapping and doing rap music and so on. But COVID lockdown, he volunteered. He came back as an activist. He's just finished 12th standard. He said, sure, your Dunya Sabki WhatsApp-based library, I'll create something for it. And he sent me this read aloud. We had a training and he was part of the training, and he knows more about technology than I ever will. He actually produced this crisp audio clear video because he knew more technology than many people in our Dunya Sabki team does. And today I was connecting him to people so that he could teach us all the things he used to remove background noise. But the most important thing is read aloud was a think aloud. Everybody who comes into our library knows that when you're reading, you're thinking. And he is so internalized in that. And the idea that these members will grow up and publishers will not only be selling books to libraries that their children frequent, but the read aloud, the quality I saw today from Shivam's read aloud, this is a person who's going to be an excellent parent. He's going to be reading to his children most of the time in a library if we're successful and we have a library in whatever neighborhood he finds himself in. But some of it will be at home with his own personal collection of books at whatever income level people in our library operate. Those who have had access to books in childhood are going to grow up and have some books in their house, and publishers can benefit from that.
So,
I can see you have a question,
yeah,
Purnima.
I have a question related to this, which ties into another very, very frequently asked question, which is that how do you actually embark on this series, on this journey where you create a non-reader into a reader? Like, how does that transformation happen? Because there are so many people who come and ask me this, that I've built the library, I've somehow managed the funds, I've got great books in my library, lekin koi padta nahi hai, nobody reads, so what's the point? Or if these kids are taking books home,
Yeah.
how can we be sure that they are reading? These are
So the question of like I created a library and people didn't come to it, and clearly that means no one else. I mean, like if we carry that question forward, what are we really saying? I'm in a conversation with an MLA. This was a couple months ago. Prachi, who's here, she and I went, so she can attest to this happening. We're sitting in this like public audience room. We're there to beg for our reading fluency program to be implemented in a government school near our library. Reading fluency, by the way, is one of the programs that everyone needs to be adopting in their library, because the vast majority of India doesn't grow up reading in libraries because of lack of libraries. Most people are not able to read fluently. They access reading through the read aloud in the library, which is the primary method, whether you are a private school kid, a kid who grows up with 500 books in their home, or a membership in a library, or whether you are a working class kid and age 14 now and coming into books for the first time in their life. A read aloud is your entryway, and we can talk more about that later. But in this MLA's office, asking for the second piece of our puzzle, read alouds plus reading fluency. So the second piece of this puzzle, we're talking to him about it, and he says to me, and he's actually considered to be one of the progressive MLAs, has, done good things. So he says to me, हमने तो office में कई सारे books रखे थे और लोगों को बुलाए थे. We had a room full of books, and we asked people to come, and it didn't work. And we had to be polite, and I couldn't ask him what I really wanted to ask him, which is like, why are you telling me this story? What is the point of saying it didn't work? Okay, ask me, why does it work with you? I think what he was saying is, if I do it and it doesn't work, there are lessons to be drawn from that which are applicable to the country. And I'm sitting at the table with him in a room full of people who are trying to get their sewage pipes fixed and so on. And I'm trying to get him to hear me. Listen, maybe it didn't work for you, but let me tell you, it works. People want to read. There's a way to do it. And he was offering evidence of why we should be doing this. He was offering evidence of why we shouldn't do it, and he was disregarding the evidence of what I was offering him. And I think when we engage with the question of why it doesn't work or how it doesn't work, it's really, really important to look at, did you create a program for poor people is one question to ask yourselves. From the very early days of running TCLP libraries, we decided that we were going to create universal programs. Like, people who are familiar with the disability rights movement understand what universal design is. Universal design, a ramp serves everybody. You could be in a wheelchair, you could be walking on two legs, you might be temporarily injured and using a pair of crutches. You might have like those amazing blades and running faster than anyone on the planet. and the ramp works for all of the above. Excellent libraries work for everybody. It's good for lots of other reasons, like it promotes democracy and so on. It's also good because an excellent library that serves all, unlike a poor library that serves poor people, adopts practices. Um, One of those practices being course correction. Oh, it's not working. Imagine you're running an excellent library and you're charging 3,000 rupees a month for membership in it. And it's, you know, it's designed for a small slice of society to come in, those who have 3,000 a month to spend. You would never think, as the MLA did, to say, and then they didn't come. You know, you would think, who do I need to bring in here? Maybe an astronomer needs to come in here to back up my, shelf full of astronomy books. And maybe we need to have a star party and people should bring their parents and we should have a giant telescope and go out in the dark after the library closes. Like keep the library open and not in the library, but out in a park. And on a clear night, look at the stars and then later go back and look at books again. We did that in our library. That's what an excellent library looks like. It's part of why the library works.
Sorry, I keep raising my hand because we're getting a lot of questions as well. But there's one question in particular that I wanted to ask in this context. So Ria has asked us, do you charge any deposit amount which may be refundable to your members? This is just so they are careful with the books. The amount can only be used in case there is damage to the book. Does this affect children's willingness to be a member? Please share your thoughts. And I would just add that there is often a correlation drawn between how much a member will value the book and the fee. So can you shed some light on that?
Okay, so in the world out there, the world that we're trying to push away when we open the door and invite people in, but I think we agree we can't leave the world behind. It's right there with us. And there's a young boy in our library. A couple of years ago, we were creating an annual report and we asked our members, can you share a quote that we can use in our annual report? And this is a child I've known for a few years, and I did not know this about him. He's a wonderful member of the library. He's in there all day long, and he's bringing people in there all day long. And he's dusting books, and he's reading to little babies, and he's reading himself. It's almost a by the by, but he's actually not a great reader, and there may be some issues with special needs or dyslexia and things going on with him. But a really amazing library member. And he said, in the conversation where I asked him for a quote, he said, in answer to the question, how did you come to the library or what did you find in the library? He said, ma'am, मैं तो 5 महीने तक बाहर खड़ा रहा. गुड्डू मुझे बार-बार बुलाया. Ma'am, for 5 months I stood outside the library. And there are people, I see them, I believe him, first of all, because I know him and we have this relationship and I know he's like painfully honest, he doesn't exaggerate. He's sort of anti-exaggeration. Philosophically, that's who he is. I think he's entered 9th or 10th standard this year. And 2-3 years ago when he joined the library, it was after standing outside for 5 months. I think if our library charged anything, fines for lost books, security deposit, he would have never come in. And because we are there for him to come in, right? The person who's asking the question also wants people to come in. We have to consider the material evidence. Forget the realities of cost or what people can afford. The first year we signed up 600 people in our library. The second year we signed up about 1,200. The total reached 1,200. Every year we were signing up between 600 and 800 people. Currently, the first branch of our library has more than 2,500 people. Around 1,200 of those have been active in the last few months in the library. How do we have such good numbers? Better numbers than private libraries that charge fees. Better numbers than libraries elsewhere in the world. Because we do not have a membership fee. We do not have a security deposit. We do not have a late fine. We do not have a damaged book fee. One of our best practices is once a week, we have something called Repair Day. And over the years, our Repair Day has gotten better and better and better. Initially, repair day was you came in and you helped in the library. If you were an older person, like 12 or 14 or 18, you were in there for 3 hours with us. Um, if you were really little, you came in with an older sibling. Your parent was also okay to come in your place and help. And we occasionally had babies whose parents came and helped. And sometimes it's just cleaning the library. If you were very tall, we might ask you to get on a ladder and clean the ceiling. But repair day was a best practice. The way it's gotten better and better is like our second branch, when it opened, some practitioners there said we should consider as repair someone spending time reading in the library. So we started doing your 3 hours or your 2 hours or your 1 hour based on your age will absolutely include the option to sit with us and either listen to a read aloud, or it will include time to read by yourself. Because this practice may have come out of the fact that kids would be cleaning books and then they would start reading the book, and then we would be loath to say to them, go back to cleaning. It was so clear they were doing library work. This is not some utopian thing. It's like really gritty stuff, because kids come in and we have Beast Quest 1 through 35, and they're in class 7 and they don't know how to numerically order those books. So you're sitting there with them. Repair day is done with an adult or a volunteer adult or an older member leader, side by side working with children as much as possible. So we're actually teaching children how to order something 1 through 35. It's not that they don't know how to rattle 1 through 35, but they don't assign mathematical value or numerical increasing order. Um, so a best practice is not to do that. I want to add that all over the world, you don't have to take what we're doing and the fact that it works, something the MLA didn't want to listen to. You don't have to just listen only to that. All over the world, libraries in Australia, in the United States, are doing away with fines. Libraries everywhere are thinking about these questions, and best practice all over the world is to not charge a security deposit, is to have free membership, and to not charge a fine. I don't know that other libraries have something like Repair Day. Um, Repair Day fulfills many other functions in our library. Absolutely, it invests kids in taking care of their library and in ownership of their library. We also have snacks as part of Repair Day. And about a year ago, after a long time of believing, I was chief sort of proponent for the idea that we will not have food in the library, not because food damages books, but because we were working side by side with NGOs where we saw like absurd things happening around food, like a class would be in session and someone would come in to celebrate their child's birthday by bringing Tetra packs of juice and putting it on each child's desk, and class would be interrupted, and the children would stand up and recite a poem, I suppose in gratitude for the juice. And so there were a lot of ways in which food was actually problematic. And so we said, no food, no food, no food. And then I think we had a lot of discussion around how it feels good to eat and to be fed, and the role nutrition can play. And one of the things we have done is in our Repair Day program, people take a break. Everyone who's dusting books or doing data entry or mopping ceilings stops and has a snack. And that's a good thing to do.
Also, I'm just going to add a disclaimer to Repair Day, which was that there's a very fine line between members thinking ki kaam karwa rahe hain. Look at these library people. They are like, especially the parents have expressed that. So it is a fairly sensitive way to talk about Repair Day, and it has to be that we are all doing this. The librarian is also doing this, and now the child is also helping the librarian.
There are some things like Jhadu Pocha that because so many of our members' parents work in houses, they describe it as कोटियों में काम करते हैं, तो मम्मी कोटी गई हैं. So that means like, in some nice house somewhere, nice meaning large, spacious, a person is bending over and mopping the ground with a piece of cloth. So all Jhadu Pocha in our library is done by the adults. by the librarians, by the volunteers, and children are never asked to do it. Sometimes member leaders will get into fights with us and say, the young teens who help run the library, nahi hum karenge. And then when we break the rule, it's to make the boys do it because girls, well, anyway. Yeah, we do not, we fine tune the program. We talk about it as helping in the library. So repair day is called repair day for a reason. And in Hindi, we say madad karna, not kaam karna, because it's not about being made to work. There are NGOs in the neighborhood of our library. Rumor has it one particular NGO like forced children to work. There are NGOs that are in my inbox recently sending me emails because I think, anyway, because I contributed or something around the COVID time saying that they are going to not give not give rations or money to people who need that at this time as charity because that lacks dignity, but rather as they have in the past with the used cloth nicely laundered and stitched and given as sanitary napkins. As with that, now they've switched tax and they're giving sacks full of rations, and the receiving party, to maintain their dignity, will do work. Now, I find it very problematic that people are saying there are only two choices in the world: charity or digging ditches or building bridges or paving stone roads to avail that bag of ration. Surely there are other choices. Our library is another choice. We do not want to say to people, you get to have a book because you worked for it. We talk about library ownership by members. We talk about helping in the library. We talk about repair day. It used to be a reparation day, but nobody could say that. It just means that I'm making whole that which I broke. There's a lot of good pedagogy around giving children the ability to fix mistakes, and forgiveness is a big element of our library work. So, yeah.
So can we take some questions because they're coming in now? So I'm going to start from the top. This comes from the good people who run Open Home Library. Given COVID and the social distancing requirements to maintain safety, I will be unable to run my free library at home. I was planning to set up free little libraries in the community behind my home. And I was wondering if you have any experience of leaving books in a free library space that is not managed and is based on the order system, which means no check-in, check-out, and of borrowing and returning books. So
I think Open Home Library, hi, we really like your work and follow you and pay attention to what you're doing. And lots of people have approached us in the past, and we've been aware of the little library movement all over the world. To me, one time we had there were these boxes of books and people came, another organization came to our library, and we really struggled to put those books out into our community. They were donated free books, and as with many or most of our donated free books, they were in English and they were like Danielle Steele and stuff. So all the best practices I would use in my at home or community-based free library. There are community-based free libraries that exist in the homes of library members. There are people in Ahmedabad who do an excellent job of that. We do it in larger settings, physical spaces. Other people I know are doing it in homes and it's free and stuff. Every practice you do there, like having excellent books, not the stuff you wouldn't mind losing forever, but like the same excellent books you would have in your library would then have to go into those little libraries. When we did it, we didn't have takers because the books sucked. Like they were books that were of no relevance. They were above the reading level or in the wrong language, or were trashed or didn't look attractive. So for all these reasons, we couldn't even give away the books. I think a little library movement is a nice addition where it works like in other countries or I know a private school in Delhi that has a little library, and it's right outside their beautiful library, which the students can go into and use. And then when they come out, here are books that they can just pick up and take and go home. And then at home, they have their own personal library. and they could come to that little library, which is cute and it looks like a birdhouse, and they can put some of their library books from their personal library that they no longer want to read or have outgrown or whatever, and some other people can take it. It's a really nice idea. I would consider it an extra, but if Open Home tries it, and I think every idea deserves to be tried, and maybe will need to be fine-tuned and so on. And if it works, then we want to hear about it. And I think the rest of the network will want to hear about it so that we can adopt it. But I did not find that the small foray we made into it worked for us. Yeah.
Okay. Then there is a question from Ria. How can school libraries also be utilized as a community library? Do you have any thoughts on this kind of arrangement?
Oh my God, we would die for someone to hand us a government school to open as a community library. So there is all this infrastructure. There are bathrooms and there's chowkidars and there's uh, um, rooms and fans and electricity. And right now we're creating a physical library because our flagship library, the library that's been open for the last 5 point some years, had to shut down because our model of partnering with other organizations and benefiting from free spaces that other people were giving us was always a weak model because the benefactor can always withdraw, right? And they have withdrawn. So we are now trying to build a library in a physical space. We've gotten an extremely subsidized space from a wonderful artist person who had this defunct space they were not using and said, you can have it. But we have to put the sewage pipe in. We have to bring the electricity connection to it because it has no electricity, it has no sewage, it has no water. And all of it is like missing infrastructure, plus chowkidari, security and maintenance. And in the free spaces where we were partnering with other places, and I would still recommend partnership possibilities where they exist, and knowing that they might end at some point an MOU or an agreement of some kind in the early part of the relationship that you keep renewing is a great way to do it. And we started doing MOUs with organizations. But going back to a school that has all this infrastructure, a school can fully open its door and say that after school, before school, weekends, anyone can come in and use it for free. Now there will be logistical problems like do we charge fines? Is there a security deposit? Because maybe the school has a security deposit arrangement with its students. Now a government school wouldn't. So I would say that um, best practices in any community library should apply in the school setting also. It should be free. Now, if you have to negotiate that, maybe you negotiate a community room in the school, and that library in that community room would be different from the collection and the rules applied to the collection of the school library. I think every private and government run school in this country needs to right now drop everything and open its door and make the necessary arrangement to share their infrastructure, because overnight we could solve this giant hole. I mean, like when we look at the impossibility of what we're asking for, it's actually not impossible. One solution is to turn existing infrastructure into double duty spaces. We can start by saying all school children can hang out here after school. School ends at 2:30, hang out till 8:30. We're open. We'll bring in the extra staff. 12th standard will start doing community service. Alumni will come back because their first cousins are in KG and it's all in the family. Or because they love their school, because their best experiences in life was in that school and they want to come back. The neighborhood will come in. And after a year of school students, maybe then 1 degree removed. Every sibling who's not enrolled in this school. Then the third year, maybe everybody who lives in this 2-kilometer proximity and produces an address, come into this free library. It's open after school, it's open before school, it's open on weekends all day. And there's a reading room, because that's a best practice, a space where you can sit and read, because maybe your house is really tiny and it's stacked with bedrolls and bartan. and people are cooking. And if you're a 14-year-old girl, they're going to be like, get your face out of that, nose out of that book and come in here and help cook. So you need a space you can go to and read. The best practice of circulation, which allows you to take the book and take it home, is great when cooking is done in the house. But while cooking is going on and you want to escape, you want that reading room. So your after school and weekend school library that transforms into a community library embraces all these best practices, maybe has a degree by degree opening process. And before you know it, you have a community library that costs a fraction of what it should cost otherwise. And for everyone who tells me, and people tell me all the time, oh no, government schools can never open. Government schools open all the time for other things. Right now they're open for ration distribution. They're doing a pretty poor job of it, but they're doing it. And all kinds of people go in and out of there. One of the big questions people ask me all the time is, hey, if it's free, all kinds of people will come in. And I think the idea is like criminal elements will come in, or I don't know, poor people will come in, or working class people will come in, or people who want to take advantage of you will come in. Like in my colony newsletter, I live in a very upper middle class colony. There are always these instructive and scary and bizarre and bad politics, bad framework, bad analysis has been applied to come up with these stories. And one of the stories was about this lovely retired couple who did this lovely thing of like teaching a few kids in their home for free. And would you know it, those kids robbed them. I don't know all the ins and outs of whether this even happened or what it means. I'm just like, I don't know why you're sharing this story. What is your point? Like that MLA who was trying to tell me that his library didn't work, who obviously had a conclusion that he was foisting onto me. I think the colony newsletter was trying to tell me that if you open your door, your government school door or your private school door, then mayhem will happen. And I want to tell you that people who come to read are not about mayhem. And we've been running our library for years, and all over the world, libraries are that are free and open to all are not about mayhem or chaos or about people taking advantage of other people or about, if you are viewing this as charity, then you might be disappointed with the end results and talk about it in terms of I was taken advantage of. But I don't think that's who we are in this room. But I bring it back to the politics of why we do what we do, so that we are constantly checking the hows and the what's questions. How do you do it? What should we do? They all relate to why we do it.
Suraj ji ka sawal hai, how do you look at the library as a need in the current situation? I'm guessing he's talking about the pandemic and its future. Could you explain the current scenario of library in India? I will add to the question. How do you look at the library as a need, and how do you look at the role of free libraries during this time?
Okay, so we don't have free libraries at this time, so there's not much of a role we're playing right now. We are amplifying our members' stories. We're searching for stories. Member leaders are sending in stories. Member leaders participated in the Internet Colo campaign. In all of like half an hour, these savvy young people like made Twitter accounts and just started tweeting the heck out of Internet Colo when we had a Twitter storm. So a free library is a great place, a great platform, but we just don't have them, right? I mean, there's like the 4 that TCLP runs, and then there's Open Home, and there's the Sangam Vihar Community Library run by Shiksha, where Utkarsh works, and Vatsala is here from the Golkwa Community Library run by Dipalya NGO, and all kinds of people. I'm just looking at Rituparna runs libraries. And I want to say that there are so few of us that to talk about a role right now, it's like we want to have a role, but it's pretty impossible. And that should not be evidence for why we don't exist or why we shouldn't exist. We can see how important it is for us to create the platforms and the spaces in which people have access to information. So one very practical thing is, of course, we are involved in connecting our library members to information about how to apply for e-ration. We are connecting them to the information that the government has not made it possible to complain when your e-ration application. I was talking to members yesterday who showed me on their phone that it's been more than a month since they put in the application. And of course, now that provision is not even there anymore, but that they did not receive the token they were supposed to receive. We also have members who, because they did not have the familiarity with that equipment and with information and accessing information, did not know they were supposed to save the token when the token came to them. And they were supposed to save it and use it. And we also ran the Internet Kholo campaign to say that people needed the data to be able to access the online-based token application system to avail e-rations. We also connected members to the organizations, the NGOs that are doing ration distribution. Connected means we created the databases, we took the phone calls, we created the script, we called the members, we called 1,000 members, we called 1,500 members, we called I don't know how many members in the end, but more than 1,500, to ask them, do you need something at this moment? And then we took that information and got it to the place where it needed to go. And then we were on the ground connecting the member, making the phone call to say ration aa gaya hai. So a community-based organization where relationships of people having confidence this organization is mine, ours, means that people were picking up the phone and calling us, means that they trusted us when we said, can you just wait a week because it's going to take a week before this organization that we are partnering with can come and do the distribution. There's 100 ways in which at this moment a library is relevant just for the immediate membership. A lot of that is around ration. A lot more of that is around members feeling like they're participating in their society. A lot of that is around kids who are at the moment undergoing severe trauma. This is not what you want to raise your children. As a parent, I would say, this is not what I would want my 5-year-old or my 9-year-old or my 15-year-old to know about the world. That these things are happening in the world, that disease is happening, that inequality is happening side by side with disease, that we are taking the short end of the stick here. And when that is happening and the kind of trauma that's associated with that is happening in the household, when a father who works as a tailor is leaving his livelihood, his mobile phone at home with his wife, now that lockdown is over, so that the child can get that. And multiple children are deciding who gets to have a class on that phone because classes are happening at the same time and there is only this one phone. When all of this is happening, a child needs what our library has been providing and many other libraries have been providing, which is low data use, fantastic read alouds, 3 times a week. You can trust that we are sending it to you just like we were sending it predictably, and there's a relationship of accountability. You can call me up and say, ma'am, mujhe acha nahi laga. And I'll tell you what, our quality is amazing because we get tons of feedback from people who like it. We do get members who leave. I don't know if in all instances they're leaving because they don't have enough data, even with our low data library use. We have audio files for those who can't download the video and so on. They might be leaving because the content didn't fit their need, but we're working. A library at this moment is as relevant as it ever was for immediate members and for society as a whole. The idea of all those libraries that don't exist right now, that's beyond, I mean, like, obviously we need them. Libraries are key to democracy.
There was this idea of how free libraries, in a free library, we are redefining reading. And this was a phrase that you were really, passionate about. And can you just tell me what that really means? How do free libraries redefine reading?
So, I repeatedly run into this in the library movement, and I'm critical of it, just as I was critical of myself when I first started doing library activism and confined myself to this idea that, people don't have libraries and we need to create libraries and more people will read, and reading is a powerful tool for thinking. And if more people engage critically and use this powerful tool for thinking, I mean, of course, people are thinkers already. Without books, they're thinkers. Some people think with movies, some people think with their friends, some people think at home through storytelling, with their grandma telling them the story. There are lots of powerful tools out there, but why would we want to shortchange anybody of this powerful tool? So for all these good reasons, I was creating libraries, and a strong current in my thinking, and I keep running into this current in other people's thinking, is, when I was a child and I didn't have books, or when I was a child, I used to go hide me and my 2 friends, we had a book club in a tree. Or when I was a child, I had a notebook and I loaned my books to my friends and I kept track. And now I'm an adult and I'm an engineer or a doctor or a filmmaker or whatever I am, or a writer as I was. And I'm like, I would like to do a little library on the side too. And what this storytelling I did with myself and that I keep encountering with people is it's confining the movement to an understanding of the reading we experienced as children. And most of us are middle class people. Most of the people in the library movement who have the power to talk and avail these sorts of platforms and speak in public about the library movement and so on, we do a great wrong when we confine ourselves thus. Because one day we were in the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art. They were lovely. They invited us. In fact, they took us up on, every time we get invited, we try to say, we'd like this invitation to be for our members and not for us. And we'd like the conversation to be in Hindi, and we should like all their family and friends to be able to come into the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art and listen to these young leaders talk about what it means to have a library. And as happens so often, when we managed to pull that off, FICA agreed to do this, and our young member leaders sat in a little circle. Then we did a fishbowl format so that they could talk to each other, and the rest of us outside the fishbowl could just listen in on their conversation. First of all, they did the most powerful thinking anyone can do in a library or anyone can do in life, which is the conversation went to this place where our young member spoke anguishedly, and this YouTube video is available somewhere on our site, about coming home after dark because she was doing library activism in the library, and गली में सब लोग पूछ रहे थे कि ये कौन है, कहाँ से होके आई है और कैसी काम करती है, गंदी लड़की है, गंदी चीजें करती हैं, and the pressure on her family, the pressure on herself. And she concluded this conversation in the fishbowl by asking the question we all ask ourselves with literature, that powerful tool for thinking about who am I? She said, they're asking, who is this girl? Is she a bad girl? And I find myself, she said about herself in this fishbowl conversation, she said, I find myself asking myself, who am I? And this who am I question will elicit different responses based on who is asking it. Somewhere else in the audience that day, there was somebody, I don't remember who, I think an academic actually, she said about this fishbowl conversation at the end of it, that you guys are redefining reading. And I embrace that term, and our organization embraced that term because it described for us something that we had been doing but that we did not have language for. We had discarded somewhere along the way this narrative that we were going to transplant our childhood, our needs, our dreams onto like vast swaths of people and create things that are actually not really possible to be created. Everybody is not going to come to the library and read Jane Eyre. They're not going to read Charlotte Bronte and shed 5 tears like I did, or wait for their Mr. Rochester, or eventually become a feminist and discard that idea. Their trajectory with reading is not what mine was. And they don't have the space in the house to read privately and silently. And they are 14 and they are reading a thin picture book. And then they're 15 and they are hell-bent on reading it to their 3-year-old cousin. And that's all totally different than what it was for me. And the libraries in our country that we create are going to be totally different than what I needed, or rather, it's going to be big enough to meet my need and meet other people's needs. A small historic point from the labor movement in the United States. Workers in the 30s and 40s and 50s, even maybe, before the labor movement was crushed in the United States, back when that was almost a socialist country, they negotiated language in their contracts for a reader on the shop floor, on the factory floor, when women were sewing in these factories, and sometimes it was children, just like in our country now, they were sewing or pressing clothes. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union negotiated language for a young person in that room to read aloud to other people in the room. And that's a different kind of reading than the reading that I grew up doing. And in our library, every day people are reading. And one more small thing, people walk into our library all the time and they say to me, how do you know when you give a book to kids that they will read it? First of all this stuff about people need to dig ditches to deserve the dignified, not charity, of ration bags. And I would argue there are other ways in which people, for example, people have a right to food security. It is neither about the dignity of them digging a ditch to, access that, nor is it about the undignified charity of being given something for free. There is nothing undignified about a free library. And the person who walks in and says, कि क्या वो लोग पढ़ रहे हैं, सचमुच पढ़ रहे हैं? First of all, no one needs to prove they're reading, because the question is not, are they reading? The question is, do they have access to reading? The library is for access. The library is not a demonstration ground for working class people to deserve to read. And then for the people who did not see the people reading in the room, what are you missing? Maybe you just need to broaden what you mean by reading, because all over the room there are 14-year-old kids reading picture books to 3-year-old kids. They're right there in our library. They're right there. They're doing something a little foreign to the person who walked into the room, who is maybe a donor and thinking about giving us a donation, or a CSR inspector coming to see if we're doing the work we said we would do in our proposal. But they fail to see something because we confine ourselves to the narrative of what we know. And you know what? If we do this right, our whole world will change for the better.
Our next question comes from Bhavna. In what ways do libraries act as instruments of social change? How could they be made into an instrument of restoration, reparation, or transformation?
I think especially when we work with children, we have a chance to do things differently than was done with us or than is being done out in the world. So we may not get to exit the planet and go to Mars and do this better or utopian society, but we can do better than we have been doing. Repair Day in the library is transformative and restorative for children who have sat in classrooms and been asked to identify themselves as the free kid in the classroom, the kid who's going to be exempted from having to pay for the picnic or whatever, for the brinjal in the classroom. But that's a terrible way to describe what actually is happening, which is a child who comes in knowing their caste, knowing that they don't have caste, knowing that some children are already learning what it is to be superior. So a library can be a place where we practice the kind of pedagogy where children see a kind of roadmap. It's not just that books are a powerful tool for thinking. The fact that we work with books and with children means we can engage with the questions in the books and engage with the questions in children's minds, the questions children are bringing with them when they come in. And we can think of the kind of pedagogy that makes it possible for us to be transformative. I had something else when I started to answer this question and I've forgotten what it is. Sorry, I've lost what I started to actually.
I'm sure we can circle back to it when you think of it. Neelima asks us, please share your experiences with selecting books for the library in terms of genres, language, cultural contexts, sources such as NBT, Pratham donors, etc.
So there are great publishers, and the Community Library Network is a place to have these conversations about which publishers out there are publishing the kind of books that working class children want and need to read. They need to read in their language, obviously. They need to read at a level in which they can access and be challenged to read a little higher. They need to see themselves in the books they're reading. So Payal Kho Gayi Hai, Eklavya, I think, Eklavya's book is amazing. Nayi Sweater is amazing. There are less amazing books that even these publishers publish, these wonderful publishers who publish in Hindi and in other regional languages. I would argue English is also a regional language in India. So wonderful books featuring Indian characters. Too often the characters are middle class characters. Nayi Sweater is not, so that's great. Nayi Sweater is a wonderful title. So we need to push these publishers, and when we are curating our own collections, we need to have a collective and concerted way to talk to publishers. Right now, they don't hear from us collectively. The network is a great place where we can put a collective together so that we can say to Pratham Books, why I don't remember what the slogan is. It's like a billion books in a billion hands, or a million books in a million hands. But that's really one book per child, right? What is that? I mean, like, when are we going to start talking about libraries? A library is a place where there is a minimum 7-to-1 ratio of books to members. In our libraries, if we have 1,000 active members, we have 7,000 books. A library is not 200 shabby discarded books that someone gave us and then we put it down in a corner somewhere and said, here's a library, and you have to wash your hands before touching the book, and then you have to not take it home with you, and you have to give me a security deposit. Um, a library is okay. In COVID time, it's okay to wash hands. A library is a place where all these best practices we've been discussing are taking place, and where a person is finding a wealth of books. And for a wealth of books, we need to push the publishers to do that. Right now, we actually don't have access to a wealth of books. We keep struggling to fill our shelves. The problem of money, the problem of space, it's as the problem of what publishers are publishing is as big a problem. Middle class India has a concerted voices. I look at Facebook, for example, has these brilliant and active and effective groups like Reading Raccoons and so on. Many of us participate in those groups, and those are middle class consumers, upper class consumers getting together and prevailing on publishers to create excellent content for their children, so that characters in their books are like, going to birthday parties where clowns are hired to perform. Um,
In fact, if I may share an experience I had on social media with, there is a book called Funny's Funny Chappals, written by Sridala Swami, which is it's an extremely well-loved book in the library. We've gone through many copies because they've just been so well-loved and well-used. And the publisher has decided quite a while back to stop publishing print copies of this book. And I don't think anybody was telling them that this was a popular book until libraries like ours started speaking on social media. Now we are all connected. So there was a very robust discussion which included the writer of this book, Sridhala. And we all sort of campaigned to say that why have you discontinued publishing this book? If you look at it from the point of view of our library, it's a bestseller. And this is also where libraries and free libraries must exercise their voice, I think, because we really know what children want to read, what people want to read, what they're demanding. And to Nilima, who asked how do we create a collection, so I think in the first shot you use your best instincts, but as the library grows, the members really, they're the ones who tell you what they want to read, what kind of stories touch a chord, or which books they want to read, because they're entering a new world. So there's no, you will never know when you're just setting up a library that this is the perfect collection. It, like everything else that Mridula spoke about, a really strong collection grows because the members inform what you're going to buy, or what you're going to get, sorry. Yeah.
so I think we're at 6:38 and we should stop at 6:45, which is in about 7 minutes or
Also,
so.
I think I've pretty much shared everybody's questions.
And I remember now what I wanted to say in answer to
Ah,
Bhavna's question. So a lot of times in my life, when I haven't known, something like rethinking reading, what is reading or who is a reader, I found out from my members that it's time to rethink reading. I found out because someone was in the audience that day and named something that had been going on in our organization and that we'd been talking about but never quite gave words to. So, in answer to the question of what is the role of the role of the librarian is to look at uh, to look at the question of accessibility, and to to look at who, are we serving everybody? We can't be serving everybody if we limit access. So the question of accessibility is a great framework or analysis point from which to create libraries. Is your library accessible? Can everyone come in? Does everybody want to come in? um, it, does it have minimum comfort? Does it have at least a fan? You know, our libraries, none of them have air conditioning, and they never will. But they're beautiful. They're really physically beautiful libraries. Does it have enough books so that people feel rich and respected? And so a librarian does all these things. A librarian brings a certain framework within which she operates. That framework has to take into consideration what has happened historically and so on. And then that librarian needs to be uncomfortable. So I know that when we first started running our library, all of us were afraid to leave the chair behind the library desk. We had a wonderful member who was just a very young person back then. She was maybe 14 at the time, and now she's done multiple library internships and planning to be a librarian. And like, I've watched her grow, and one of her big areas of growth was that back when we first started the library and she was a bacha, she said, "Nay, I will sit behind the desk, you all go on the community walks." So the community walk is a tool we use in our library, which forces us to leave the library and go door to door and talk to members, to talk to them about access, to talk to them about what agitates them, what they want from the library, or why they find the library is useless and why they don't want their kids to go to the library. So she didn't want to be part of those conversations, and today she she doesn't just willingly do it; she spearheads it. Like, we've had survey projects to figure out how to create digital access for members that she was wholly responsible for as an intern, and now she's a college student. And it's her community. She lives there. She lives on those streets and in those flats with her cousins and her friends and her neighbors and many thousands of people who she doesn't know personally. And she's now willing to go door knocking. What she is she's willing to be uncomfortable. Whether it is the discomfort of knocking on a door for change, and that door could be the physical door in the neighborhood of the library, or the metaphorical door of the publishers, you know, or the door of the caste system, or of class, you know, or that government door to say you need to turn your government school over after hours to us to run it as a community library. There's going to be great discomfort. And how you know you are making change is if you are being uncomfortable. I'm not saying you can't have fun while doing movement work. I'm not saying that there aren't good days and that we don't deserve to be comfortable and to have an air cooler and a fan. And in the winter in our library, we have a basket of shawls, and children actually can borrow a shawl and wrap themselves in it. And when we tried to have a heater, the landlady was upset with us because that kharcha, that expense. So I think the role of the librarian is to be uncomfortable, to raise the big questions.
All right.
To think about curating books and to think about why there is no access, both.
Right. So it's 6:45 almost. I think we will close. I just want to thank everyone who joined us, and especially thank Mridula for giving us her insights in this time. If any of you who are part of TCLN feel like you want a similar session on a particular topic, I'm leaving our email address, and I'm also leaving the link to our group. Please reach out, and we will try to arrange these sessions. There are many questions when it comes to the work that we are doing. Perhaps maybe a session on the lockdown or specific best practices, whatever your need is, just keep talking to us and we'll see what we can do.
And we have in TCLN negotiated discounts from publishers. And so I hope people are connecting and making sure they don't go buy books at full price or even at distributor price, because some of those discounts are way deeper than anything any distributor can offer.
Right. So all right, so then let's wrap this up, and I will make this available on YouTube as soon as possible. This time it's recorded in full, thankfully. All right, bye you all.
Bye.